Hi, ladies. Welcome to the Women's Wisdom Village. If this is your first Zoom with me, welcome. This year, I'll be hosting the village once a month, and each month we'll focus on a different goddess from world mythology to take a look at how these ancient goddesses and mythologies offer new perspectives on issues that concern regent women today, women between the ages of 45 and 70. As regent women, we're living in what is potentially the most powerful stage of our lives. It's my hope that through the exploration of myths and archetypes, that together we can discover gems, new understandings, and insights about how to live our most fulfilled and authentic lives. A mythic view can help us see where we've come from, where we are, and where we might want to go. It can help us see the larger historical arc of human troubles, pain, and ultimately transformation. Myth shines a light on the common denominators of the human condition. Understanding these human stories, these mythologies, tales and fairy tales as descriptions of universal human experiences can help keep us from falling too far down that rabbit hole of depression, anxiety, and despair, by reminding us that we're not the only ones who've lived through hard times. And myth shows us that yes, even the goddesses suffer. I'm Dr. Andrea Matysek-Slominski, which is too much of a mouthful and terrible to spell, so call me Andrea or Dr. A. I'm grateful that you've decided to share your evening with me for the mini workshop, Finally Spring, Planting the Seeds of Your Dreams. Well, ladies, daylight savings has begun. Sunday is the spring equinox, and the days are finally getting longer. Woohoo! Spring is officially here. And in our day-to-day lives, there's more light at the end of the tunnel than there has been in a long time. Vaccines are rolling out, and it seems that we may finally be emerging from that long night sea journey, our journey through the underworld of the past year. Reviewing what we talked about since the end of last year, in December, we talked about welcoming hope and finding joy in the midst of the anxiety and the fear of the pandemic. Through finding joy at the heart of the holiday season, we were able to reclaim some of that. We'd celebrated next the solstice and the turning of the wheel of the year towards spring and renewal. This year, in 2021, so far, we've explored tapping back into the rhythms of nature to ground ourselves through the long periods of isolation and social distancing. Paying attention to nature and the seasons as part of the patterns of the feminine soul has offered a touchstone or a map that we can apply to our lives. After the solstice, I suggested that in light of our feats of endurance during the lockdown, we all needed some deep rest and fallow time. Fallow time, the time of the cold, the snow, and the barren fields, was our time to dream and imagine ourselves forward. It was the time to sift through the seeds of our dreams and the dreams of our future. In the depths of winter, we next explored the wild woman archetype and explored how to keep in touch with our inner wild woman and the energies of creativity and vitality that archetype contains. Last month, we looked at the metaphors of spinning and weaving and how they represent the power within women to transform one thing into another. Women are the original alchemists. Throughout human history and the Great Leap Forward, alchemy was our superpower by creating new life from our bodies, changing seed to plants, grain into crops, animals into livestock, clay into pots, plants and wool into thread, thread into cloth, and cloth into so many things. Women transformed the world. Finally, we looked at spinning as a metaphor that represents our ability to control our own creativity, its rhythms, its colors, textures, purposes, and products. From our life experience and knowledge, and our wisdom, we can claim our sovereignty, allowing us to control and direct the weaving of the next section of our lives' tapestry. Though we may not have total control over all aspects of our lives, we can still influence the colors, feelings, images, symbols, patterns, and stories that we weave into that next chapter. Now here we are. It's spring. Hallelujah. And well met. It's the season of rebirth, of growth, planning and planting. What dreams have you been nurturing throughout the winter? Who have you been dreaming about becoming? Have you been dreaming about change in regarding like your life, yourself, or the lives of others? Take some time and think about that. Okay, we're back. Tonight, I want to talk about spring, about the reunion of Demeter and Persephone, and I'm going to add a little swerve and a plot twist or two. When we started tonight, I mentioned that we're emerging from our night sea journey. First, a night sea journey is a motif, a theme, or mythic metaphor for the dark night of the soul. This is the still watches of the night when we face our own mortality, when we fear for those we love or ourselves, when we ask, what is the meaning of all of this? Does anything matter at all? It's the existential crisis of facing the terrible mystery that is life, seen as a journey, a night sea journey. The unknown, fear, and anxiety can populate the night sea journey. It can also represent sailing the seas of our collective lives into dark territories where we never planned to go, like sailing into a pandemic and social upheaval that created so much uncertainty, fear, division, and death. The night sea journey is also our inner soul journey, the state of our soul, our dreams, our deep thoughts and feelings. It's how we're dealing with the stress, anxiety, and fear, and the feeling of loss in our souls and our inner lives. It's an inner and an outer journey. And certainly the pandemic has taken us on a night sea journey, on a trip to the underworld that has claimed over 2.5 million lives and sickened 115 million more. The underworld of ancient Greece was a dwelling place of the souls of the dead. It wasn't like hell as described or understood in the Hebraic or Christian traditions, but rather a dark, shadowy place beneath the earth, the resting place of souls, ruled by Hades and Persephone, the king and queen of the underworld. For us, the underworld and the gods that rule it are metaphors for states of mind and life experiences and the territories of grief, death, separation, loss, abandonment, fear, paralysis, and more. It can represent what we've repressed, the shadow side of our personalities, the dark and unpleasant aspects of ourselves and others that we don't want to interact with. The underworld can also be the territory of the void, emptiness, darkness, and cold. It can be the place where life waits for rebirth and the return of spring. This also describes the fallow season, the winter, when the seeds rest in the earth that is frozen and dark, seeds suspended between life and death. There is so much in these metaphors for women in regency. This territory is like rich, newly fertilized garden, waiting for seeds. The past year during the pandemic and all it changed and all it took from our lives certainly caused grief and loss, just as Demeter grieved for her daughter Persephone after she was abducted. We too were unwillingly separated from those we loved, our careers, our lives, and all that we celebrated within them. Though we all searched for new ways to connect or fill our time, or as we struggled keeping our homes and ourselves together, the reminders of the loss of human connection, support, touch, and love were ever present. And it's not over yet. This field of loss is ripe ground for the birth of the dreams of what we want to do and who we want to be when it's over, what we want to do next. I want to share with you another perspective on journeying to the underworld. Feminist scholar and professor Dr. Christine Downing writes in The Goddess, mythological images of the feminine, quote, I began to see Hades as meaning not bad, but deep, to mean the realm of souls rather than of egos, the realm where experience is perceived symbolically, close quote. She goes on to describe a time in her life where she felt she was in the underworld. She was, quote, propelled as though by outward circumstances into a kind of death. It was a time during which there was no hoping or dreaming left in me at all. I knew a despair utterly different from any confusion or depression I had ever experienced earlier. I discovered that I could not extricate myself. I knew there was no choice. This had to be lived. That is all there was to it. Eventually, I discovered there is indeed a natural healing process, close quote. How many of us have felt this or shades of this the past year? Downing notes that it felt akin to Persephone's joyful return from the underworld in the spring. She notes, quote, I saw that when wholeness did not mean not being in parts, and that health did not mean not hurting. During that night, I relinquished my negative view of illness, suffering, and mourning. I no longer saw these things as things to get over, to put behind or deny. This is a kind of archetypal understanding and seeing through the experience and the darkness to its part in the greater whole of human life that allows us to acknowledge these moments in our lives as integral to our soul making, our deepening conscious experience of life, close quote. I want to discuss this idea a little, and in the live Women's Wisdom Village we will. What do you think about her statement? I'll read it again. Quote, I saw then that wholeness did not mean not being in parts, and that health did not mean not hurting. During that night, I relinquished my negative view of illness, suffering, and mourning. I no longer saw these as things to get over, to put behind or deny. This is a kind of archetypal understanding and seeing through the experience and the darkness to its part in the greater whole of human life that allows us to acknowledge these moments in our lives as integral to our soul making and our deepening conscious experience of life. You might want to journal on it. We're going to discuss it for a moment. We'll be back. Okay, we're back. How like Persephone we are. How like Persephone we were and are. She didn't go into the underworld with Hades willingly, just as we didn't go into the pandemic and all its loss and death willingly. Hades kidnapped her from a summer afternoon's picnic and flower gathering party. She screamed and cried all the way down to the underworld, grieving and calling out to her mother and her father for rescue. Here, the young, beautiful princess is taken to the world of shadows. Her experience changes her. She gains knowledge and experience while there. She's forced to grow and change. She eats the food of the underworld, the pomegranate. And like Eve, her knowledge expands and she grows into womanhood, and then she becomes a queen. The pomegranate signifies beauty, love, marriage, fertility, birth, rebirth, hope, prosperity, and eternity. In the live Women's Wisdom Village, we're going to discuss now, how have you grown and changed in the last year? What have you learned from our collective underworld experience? Now, if we look at Demeter's perspective of the myth, she's searching the world over for her daughter, who she heard screaming as she was abducted, and she can't find her. In the Greek myth, Demeter and Persephone are often considered two aspects of the same goddess. Persephone, also called Kore, which means maiden, is the young girl, and Demeter is the mother. They represent two stages of our lives and two stages of the journey towards our maturity. Pandemic or no, going through midlife, menopause, and postmenopause, we can feel like our youth has been stripped from us, has been abducted, and we're growing older. Living through the pandemic at this age adds another layer of symbolism, metaphor, and meaning to the losses of midlife. Demeter searched for her daughter and couldn't find her for 9 days. On the 10th day, Hecate comes forward and tells Demeter that she heard her being abducted, but didn't see it. So the two of them go to the sun, Helios, to ask him what he saw. He tells Demeter that it was Hades, the brother of Zeus, Persephone's father, that made a deal with Hades for her to become his bride. All of this is mythically significant. Persephone as maiden and Demeter as mother were linked to Hecate because Hecate was seen and understood as the crone, as the ancient wise one, completing the triple goddess form of maiden, mother, and crone. Often, Hecate was symbolized as a triple goddess form with 3 bodies, facing in 3 directions. In 700 BCE, Hecate is described as being one of the most ancient and powerful Greek goddesses. She was given eternal power over 3 realms, the heavens, the earth, and the seas. She was revered for her power that equaled those of the Titans, whose time in archaic Greek myth was before the birth of the gods of Olympus. She represents an ancient feminine power that is associated with thresholds and liminal spaces, doorways, crossroads, boundaries, lands beyond the living. Hecate could walk between the worlds of the living and the dead, bridging the divides between the upper world and the underworld, the gods and the mortals, and the Olympians and the Titans. As guardian of entrances, she could protect homes, people, towns, and cities. Symbolically, she travels with dogs and carries torches to light the darkness, as well as the keys to the gates of the realms of the dead and the keys to the heavens. Animals associated with her also include lions, cows, boars, serpents, and horses. She is the guardian of roads and journeys, and she guides Persephone back and forth to and from the underworld. Over time, she's become associated with magic, knowledge of herbs, plants, and poisons, ghosts, and witchcraft. A few minutes ago, I mentioned that the myth tells us Demeter searched for Persephone for 9 days. 9 is a symbolic number as well. It's 3 times 3, which can be interpreted as the ancient triple goddess, the maiden, the mother, and the wise woman, who also represent the 3 eternal cycles of birth, death, and rebirth. 3 times 3. The myth also tells us that Demeter wandered the earth for a year after discovering the fate of her daughter. During this year of despair and depression, Demeter wasn't performing her goddess rites, and the earth was not bearing fruits or grain. The people and the animals were beginning to starve. We might feel like Demeter after a year of separation from our loved ones and our former lives. Demeter was discovered by a group of young women, sisters, who had gone to the well to draw some water. To go to the well is symbolic of the thirst for knowledge, symbolic of the thirst for the waters of life or the secrets of great mysteries. To draw water from a well is a spiritual and symbolic act. Demeter was sitting on the side of the road near the well in the form of a poor old woman, hiding her goddess nature. I can relate to this idea that these changes and deep losses that we endure at this time of life can transform our energies and rob us of our vitality, creativity, and hope. Age and cares can wear us down to the point where we forget our essential divinity. This past year has been a great example of that. There were days I didn't know if I could take one more day of lockdown, or days when I felt just like sitting by the side of the road and falling into a stupor with Demeter. The stress and high cultural tension some of those days were almost too much to bear. Now Demeter, paralyzed by her loss and grief, was rescued by a group of young women who, after asking about her welfare, brought her home. Asking about her welfare. This is the question that heals the wasteland. What is the matter? What is the trouble? Asking what is the problem from a place of compassion is the question that heals the wasteland in Arthurian romances and all of the Grail romances. The women at the well brought her to their home through their compassion, offering her a place to live and a job as a nursemaid to their little brother. Now, this all may sound ridiculous that a powerful goddess would be doing these things in a myth, but if we look at it as a metaphor for the lives of older women whose power had been stripped from them, who have had so much experience and wisdom in their lives, yet are cast aside by culture, we can see the redemptive power within the relationships that women can form with each other. For Demeter, it wasn't until an old woman, Balbo, and some myths refer to her as a goddess as well, or as a trickster, or as a holy fool, came to Demeter and began to tell her dirty jokes. She sang bawdy songs and eventually lifted her skirt, flashing her aged privates at the goddess. She finally got Demeter to laugh long and hard, and that broke the spell of her depression. The breaking of the depression allowed a new energy to come in. Through the cracks, the light gets in. It created an internal shift, a reversal from inaction to action, which then inspired Demeter to begin to negotiate with Zeus, trading the fertility of the earth and the survival of humanity for her daughter's return from the underworld. Being reborn to herself and her ancient powers of productive creativity, Demeter stands in her power, pledging to let the world starve in her grief. She stands up for her essential self. She fights for her sovereignty, for herself and for her daughter and for all women, if she is this one in three together, this triple goddess form. Demeter and Persephone represent two of the three aspects of the divine feminine that had been unwilling victims of those imbalanced patriarchal forces. The agreement negotiated between them achieves a balance of the masculine and the feminine archetypal energies on one level. Hecate, guardian of the thresholds and liminal spaces, has the key to our ascent into the heavenly realms. Demeter holds the sacred cycles of the earth, and Persephone has opened the gate to the deepening of the soul experience with the descent into Hades, from which she returns in renewal each year. This offers us the ability to tap into the energies of these realms of human experience and see them as enlightening, enriching, and deepening the experiences of life. After revealing herself to be a goddess, Demeter had the people of Eleusis build her a temple, where the sacred festivals of the Eleusinian mysteries were celebrated. This was a ceremony of ritual initiation into the cycles of life, death, and rebirth, and it was considered so sacred that there was a death penalty for anyone who revealed the ceremony and what happened during it. So, we actually don't know the details. That's how well they kept the secret. But we believe that it was a representation of the abduction of Persephone into the underworld and her return, and its illustration of the cycles of birth, death, and rebirth. Ancient historians wrote that the Greeks who experienced this initiation no longer feared death, so it must have been pretty powerful. From these ancient goddesses and their myths, metaphors, and symbolism, we can see that the cycles of birth, death, and rebirth follow the natural world and the seasons, and even in our own cycles as women. The generative energy to recreate ourselves and our lives lies within each of us, just as the moon is born, grows full, wanes, and dies each month to be reborn again. We can use our threshold crossing out of one stage of life and into another to regenerate and recreate ourselves anew. as we cross from maiden to householder, householder to regent, and regent to wise woman. There are going to be deaths of one way of living, of accustomed ways of being, and births of something altogether new. We'll be back in a minute. Okay, we're back. The changes and transformations of perimenopause, midlife, menopause, and postmenopause are liminal spaces. They're thresholds, which we can understand metaphorically as being protected by Hecate. On the other side of the threshold to the underworld is Persephone. She's ready to leave behind what has outlived its usefulness, what has to be shed, what has to die, and be left in the underworld in order for something new to sprout up and take its place. The final story I want to share with you tonight, before we plant the seed of our dreams in our little mini ritual, is one of the labors of Psyche. The word Psyche in ancient Greek means both soul and butterfly, and we're all familiar with the butterfly as the metaphor for transformation. Psyche's story is a story of transformation and coming to consciousness about herself, her inner life, and her relationship with Eros. Briefly, to tell you only a part of her tale, Psyche is a beautiful mortal girl who had been abandoned on a mountaintop to meet her fate. She was rescued by the god Eros, and they fell in love. She broke a rule, though, in their relationship, which was to remain in the dark while they were together and never to look at Eros. When she broke her promise, Eros left her. Aphrodite is the mother of Eros, and she gave Psyche 4 tasks to complete to win him back. These 4 tasks represent Psyche's awakening of her consciousness and her maturity and growth into womanhood. Each of these 4 tasks teaches her something that she needs to learn, and each of them seems impossible to Psyche in the completion of each task. She discovers helpers, and she's undertaking them while pregnant. Like the butterfly in the chrysalis, Psyche is metaphorically about to give birth to a new self. Her 4th task is to go to the underworld with an empty box and bring back some of Persephone's beauty cream for Aphrodite. First, she thinks she'll have to kill herself to get into the underworld, and then she'll lose Eros forever. But she gets some good advice and is told to enter through a different gate. And she's told to take coins for the ferryman so he can take her back and forth across the river Styx, cakes to bribe the 3-headed dog, Cerberus, and the last advice that she's given is that she's going to be asked for help 3 times in the underworld, and she must ignore their pleas. And when Persephone has given what she came for and returns to the upper world, she must not open the box with the beauty cream in it. When we're going through times of transition, change, and transformation, like Psyche, sometimes we have to learn to say no. We only have so much energy when we're in the underworld, when we're in difficult situations and times of personal strife. When we're going through growth spaces like this, like the butterfly, we're full of potential, the potential of our new selves, but the cocoon needs time to do its work. In the end, after returning to the upper world and wanting to be the most beautiful woman she can be to attract Eros back to her, Psyche opens the box and falls into a deep, death-like sleep. For all that she learned in her trials, discernment, patience, wisdom, creativity, and determination, she still wants to find her acceptance and value through her relationship to Eros. In the time that she's been going through her trials, Eros had grown up some too. He wakes her from her deathly sleep, and they choose to have a conscious relationship, which represents the perfected relationship between love and soul. Here we can see Psyche was the maiden, like Persephone. She was a lover, like Aphrodite is known to be. She was the mother and pregnant, like Demeter. And in a death-like sleep, at the crossroads of life and death, she's like Hecate. She represents the growing into ourselves in a deepening way through the seemingly unachievable tasks of life. When we started tonight, I began by talking about the territory we've covered in the village in the past few months. The holidays and welcoming hope after a long year of fear and anxiety. The solstice as the turning of the wheel and the return of the light. The need for deep rest in the fallow months and the returning to the rhythms of nature. The reclaiming and reconnection to our wild woman within. And the spinning of the threads of the dreams for spring. And now, finally, spring is here. It's spring, and Demeter, goddess of the grain and fertility of the living earth, invites us to plant our dream seeds to recreate ourselves. We are the women at the well, asking the question, what will heal the wasteland? We are the women offering shelter and safety, inviting Demeter into our home, giving her a seat at our table. Now she invites us to break free from old negating energies and emerge from her temple, renewed by the round of the eternal return of the seasons, our return from the underworld with the seeds of our own rebirth, ready to plant in the fertile soil of our imagination, our creativity, and our dreams. Okay, so now I invite you to do your own little ritual planting. First, take a few minutes to think about 3 things. Think about a dream you've been nurturing for yourself, what you're dreaming about for yourself in this stage of life. Is it an inner dream of how you perceive and feel about yourself and your life, or is it an outer dream of doing or achieving? Second, think about someone else you know who has a dream for their life. Is there someone who you can send some of your creative feminine energy to help them achieve their dreams? And third, think of a dream for the world, the nation, or your community. What dream would you like to see bloom in that sphere of life? Now, on 3 tiny strips of paper, write 1 dream on each strip, or draw 1 symbol that represents each dream. Then you're going to roll the little dreams up, and you're going to put them in the bottom of the pot. Fill the container halfway with soil. Then you can put the rest of the soil in the pot and plant the seeds that you've purchased or that you have in your home or that you found. Once you plant the seeds and you tamp down the soil, let's take a moment and close our eyes and take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. We've placed our dreams for ourselves, our friends and loved ones, and the world in the soil from the earth. It will nourish and support the seeds that we've planted to represent rebirth this spring and our potential in the year to come. May Hecate, Demeter, and Persephone bring you the energies of renewal and growth from the seasons of nature to fulfill your dreams. May these little sprouts growing in your window serve to remind you each day to take the steps necessary to bring your dreams into reality. Remember to keep the seeds moist and follow the directions on the planting. Check them daily to see how your dreams are nurturing the flowers sprouting in your window. This is Dr. A saying thanks for joining the village.